TNA was apparently meant to be dead right now. That's what everybody said week to week to week to week to week. But instead, it only transformed into Impact Wrestling, which does tick along very nicely. But it certainly seems like it's about to team up, or has teamed up with All Elite Wrestling to create some new kind of sports entertainment powerhouse. Some of the names who have held their World Championship too over the years have really been a who's who of professional wrestling. That's why I, Simon Miller here at What Culture, have decided to stand, look at you right in the face, look at you right in the eyes, and rank every single one from worst to best. And this took a very long time, so let's just have a lot of fun together. Number 35, Alberto El Patron. In 2017, it was Alberto El Patron that was chosen to be the guy who was going to unify the TNA and the Global Force Wrestling Championships. This then all fell apart very quickly because within 1 month, he was suspended from the promotion because of things happening in his personal life. And that's all I'm going to say about it. That's all I'm going to say about it. The man is too controversial and it just blows my brain. Let's move on. Number 34, Ray Gonzalez. This one was so messy and kind of sums up TNA at its worst. But in 2005, Ray Gonzalez did become the TNA World Heavyweight Wahoo Wahey champion after he beat Jeff Jarrett. But then before the night was over, there was some kind of dusty finish. And as it turned out, the ref had made a mistake. And oh, poof, the belt was back on Jeff. It was done to get a reaction from the crowd, and I suppose it did. And actually, 10 years later, TNA decided they would recognize this as a proper reign. But honestly, what? It lasted 6 seconds? What can you possibly say about it? Number 33, Pentagon. Now, in terms of the physical amount of days he held on to this championship, Pentagon had it for two days. Now, if you're watching on television, it was more like a month, but because of the way TNA take their TV, 40 hours later they said, Penta, can we please have that shiny thing back? We've got to give it to somebody else. But Penta did indeed win it in his first match in the company when he took on Austin Aries and Brother Phoenix in a triple threat match, and he successfully defended it against Jimmy Jacobs and Eli Drake. And then 4 weeks later in TV land, he lost it back to Austin Aries. Number 32, Rhino. Just crazy from start to finish, Rhino was a stand-in replacement for Kevin Nash at 2005's Bound for Glory. And in true wrestling tradition, because he was the replacement, he got to win the big gold belt. Because it was done for all those reasons though, within 2 weeks he was then dropping it back to Jeff Jarrett, who had held it beforehand. And some people say that title lacked prestige because often it was treated like a hot potato. Number 31, James Storm. James Storm popped back up in Impact Wrestling again recently and then vanished, but forgetting about that and going into the past, when he did win the World Championship, it was kind of cool. Because not only did he shock the universe when he beat Kurt Angle, but there was extra significance here, because a few days prior, his best buddy, his brother, Bobby Roode, was unable to do the same. It led to Roode finally snapping and smashing a beer bottle over James Storm's head, and not only did that end his title reign, but it sparked off a pretty decent program between them all. So it did have some significance. It just didn't last very long. Number 30, Mick Foley. Well, would you look at that, the things we forget. Mick Foley was originally brought into Total Non-Stop Action to be the general manager, and then of course nobody could help themselves. He was back in the ring, and he was also trying to play a bad guy version of himself. Nobody wanted that. It was flipping Mick Foley. And it was always going to happen that he was going to be given the world title because of who he was, but that was also the issue. He didn't need it. He was higher than the championship, and that should never happen, but it was true. So even though they tried to pitch him in this way, everyone was like, no, this is a waste of time. Number 29, Abyss. Much like The Undertaker in WWE, Abyss didn't have that many world title runs because the character didn't need it. He was over because he was this big, scary, spooky dude, although when the time did call for it, they would give him a little run. It didn't help that when he finally did get his hands on the big one in 2006, he beat Sting via DQ. I mean, winning anything via disqualification often is absolutely nuts. And then within 2 months, he was dropping it to Christian Cage. So again, like we've already said with a lot of these, it was just there. Number 28, Chris Sabin. Certainly a cool idea and one that Chris Sabin deserved given his tenure. He was also one of these people to cash in option C, which allowed him to go after Bully Ray and very shockingly, actually defeat him for the world title. The feud between those two guys was really good too because you had a defined good guy and you had a defined bad guy, but this was a situation where TNA, if they really wanted to make Chris Sabin, had to go all in, and they didn't. Number 27, Mr. Anderson. The former Mr. Kennedy had two huge fans in 2010, and their names were Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff, who just so happened to be running the company. Unfortunately, by the time they had arrived in the promotion, it just felt like Mr. Kennedy's time had passed. I mean, if we had done this a few years earlier, it probably would have rocked. And as it turned out, it was merely alright. It was still decent when he did beat Jeff Hardy for the world title in 2011, but 6 months later, he was already becoming a 2-time champion, and this also faltered because he wasn't really a good guy and he wasn't really a bad guy. He was an asshole, as he often told us. He just needed a little bit of something else. Some sugar with the salt. Number 26, Drew Galloway. This was alright, don't get me wrong, but it kind of felt like something Drew Galloway had to do as he made his way back to WWE as opposed to must-watch TV. Galloway was also only in TNA for a cup of coffee before he did go on to Ventures New, although he did cash in his feast or fight thing on Matt Hardy to become the world champion. And then soon after, he lost it to Bobby Lashley. This was always the idea because, again, Drew had bigger plans in mind, but it just means when you do go back through every single world champion, he kind of just sits in the middle of the list. Number 25, Johnny Impact. This was a good run. Johnny Impact, who of course named himself after the company, had a damn decent 200-run reign and reminded you once again he was far better than where WWE had pegged him earlier in his career. The issues came in the sense of how he won it. Going down at 2018's Bound for Glory, when he did defeat Austin Aries, TNA decided to do this weird work shoot thing, which even right now I'm not sure what was real and what wasn't real. I don't mean that in a good way. It just annoyed me as a fan because I was like, well, what the hell is going on? But yeah, after Johnny Impact had won, Austin Aries, who was meant to be dead, you know, because he'd been beaten up, just rolled out the ring and walked off like he didn't give a crap. Number 24, Eli Drake. Eli Drake was always going to be in a hard position because he was chosen as the guy to pick up all the pieces after everything that had gone down with ALBERTO. So he's always punching uphill, but he did his best. Really though, it was just a moment of transition, but you do have to say, without a steady guy like Eli Drake being in charge of all of this, who the hell knows where TNA would have ended up? Maybe they actually would have died. I mean, no, TNA's never gonna die, but it sounds fascinating to say. Number 23, RVD. This was the right call. Rob Van Dam felt like a massive babyface when he finally arrived in TNA, and when he finally won the world title, do you know who held up his hand in victory? None other than Hulk Hogan. And back then, I tell you, that meant something. And it did have somewhat of a no pun intended impact, but of course, Rob Van Dam's best days were behind him. But the real sticking point was how he lost it, or the fact he didn't actually lose it. He just got taken out of the game after a backstage attack, meaning he never had to drop the belt properly, and that never works. Wrestling is all about one guy gets it, he builds himself up, and then he passes all that juice on to the next guy, and so on and so forth. We didn't do that here, and it hurt everything. Number 22, Magnus. This was just a solid run, much like Nick Aldis has been doing with the NWA title. If you need a decent, solid in-ring worker, he is the guy. Plus, he always carries himself like a star. This was also the case here too when he came in as Dixie Carter's hired gun and even kicked AJ Styles out the company for good. It did help Magnus no end though and cemented his place at the top of the card, and there is still untapped potential here. One day I tell you, you gotta see it. Number 21, Eric Young. Fans absolutely loved seeing Eric Young win the world title in 2014. He had been a mainstay with the company, everybody could easily get behind him, but the problem was that TNA had seen what WWE was doing with Daniel Bryan and went, well, why don't we just do that with Eric Young? And it was fine. It was just a little on the nose. Because it meant on one side you did have this satisfying win that made you feel all warm and fuzzy in your tum-tum, but on the other, you had a bandwagon that we had jumped on. Those two things don't really go together. Number 20, Sami Callihan. Sami Callihan took his opportunity as Impact World Champion and he absolutely smashed it. I remember some people at the time going, well, he doesn't feel like he should be at the top of the card, and he proved them completely wrong by being one of the most despicable heels we have seen in years, and you just wanted him to have his ass kicked. He also used all of this to put Tessa Blanchard over not only as the new champion, but as a new star, and that is the role and that is the job of the guy who was carrying the big belt. We've already talked about it. So he got it absolutely spot on. And don't get me wrong, Sami is still my mortal enemy, and I still will go and re-challenge him once the borders are open in the What Culture Death match. And then of course I'll be killed. But sometimes you just have to do these things. Number 19, Eddie Edwards. Vastly underrated, Eddie Edwards was just the right guy at the right time to become TNA/Impact World Champion, and because he did get put in that position, all of a sudden all of their main events were kicking butt. And do not underestimate how important it is to ensure that your last match on any kind of show is going to be the best one possible, and even better still, Eddie Edwards used this as a platform to become one of TNA/Impact's wrestling top guys, and he's still there now. I mean, he has too many comebacks, but he's got a bad eye. So this was the case of the championship making the man and the man making the championship, and now no matter what type of feud he goes into, the fan base cares. Number 18, Brian Cage. Brian Cage held the Impact World title for 180 days, and not only did he always look like he deserved to be in that position, but he also breathed fresh life into the scene. His hybrid style of also being a monster and a high flyer made it incredibly interesting too, and if you want to say this set him up for his AEW run, I ain't going to argue with it. In fact, if you go through Brian Cage's career, every year he just gets better and better and better. And everybody wants to say that, it means your trajectory is going up. Number 17, Raven. Raven said that it was his destiny to become the TNA World Champion shortly after he left WWE in 2003. And while it took him 2 years to get there, he was able to do it. He held that belt for 88 days. And really, when you threw all this in a cooking pot, it worked very nicely. Always slightly underrated, Raven was awesome in ECW, had that great group in WCW, was never looked at very fondly within WWE, and kind of brought his career to a close in an okay way in TNA. And he felt like a world champion, which is what you couldn't say for his run before this. Again, I don't really get why WWE never appreciated him, but they didn't. Number 16, Ron Killings. You have to go back to 2002 for this, but if you only know Ron Killings in his R-Truth role, you will have your socks absolutely blown off when you hear some of his promos at the turn of the millennium. The man was just so angry and pissed off, and he even made a rap album where he turned all of this anger towards the WWE. It was crazy. Honestly though, Killings was on fire during all of this and is also the first ever African American to ever win the 10 pounds of gold. He had 2 runs as the champion, and it just goes to show what kind of a career this man has had. And I tell you, if WWE wanted to put him back on top, I bet he would still smash it. Number 15, EC3. One of the constant criticisms aimed at TNA is that they never actually built their own talent and put them on top, but one of the exceptions to that rule was none other than Ethan Carter III. He got over so big with the crowd that he was able to become world champion, and then EC3 generated so much buzz that WWE re-signed him, even though when he had been there before, he wasn't even given a stick to shake. Now that didn't work out, but he never would have been given that opportunity if it wasn't for his work in TNA, and also every time he was the champion, he always felt like a credible threat that you hated because he was just using his family ties. Number 14, Ken Shamrock. Ken Shamrock was the first ever TNA World Champion. This was not a bad idea, given that 1, he still felt like a star from WWE, but 2, he was also a star in mixed martial arts in the UFC. Also at the time, everyone presumed he was going to go back to World Wrestling Entertainment, and when he didn't and chose this, it kind of made you raise your eyebrow. Now the reason he did it is because he wanted the freedom outside wrestling to keep on fighting, but fact's a fact. The only problem was it was always going to be a losing battle given what TNA had decided to do financially and when it came to pay-per-views, but when you saw all the guys that they had, Kenny did alright. Number 13, Matt Hardy. Big Money Matt was great. I mean, not only was he an asshole, but it also gave him all the power and momentum to climb to the top of the ladder and become Impact or TNA World Champion. And he felt like he should be in that position. This was Matt Hardy. He was drowning in star power. It was also this subsequent fall from grace that did kickstart everything to do with the Broken Universe. So maybe if he doesn't become World Champion, we don't get that. And do you know what it all resulted in? Fun. And that 3-letter word is what some wrestling fans forget. As long as you're having fun, everything is going to be okay. Also, on a quick side note, I still think he should have had 1 run as WWE champ. Number 12, Christian Cage. Christian helped elevate the TNA World title simply because of who he was. He had decided to leave WWE on his own merits and jump ship. And as soon as he did, and because he was so good in the ring, man, he just felt like a main eventer. And of course, the criticism was always that TNA would just go after WWE castaways. That was not the case here. Christian Cage made an impact. It also resulted in some of his best years if you're talking about momentum, and I mean that from both being a good guy and being a bad guy. He is underrated till the end. Number 11, Bully Ray. A character that really should have been given a run in WWE. Bully Ray was just so easy to hate. He was already the top heel in the company before he became the world champion, and that's why they gave him the belt, because nobody else at the time made any sense. Bully also got revealed as the leader of Aces and Eights during all of this, and while that was a little bit silly, he still ensured to put over the likes of Chris Sabian and AJ Styles, and coming out the other end, they felt like bigger stars than ever. Number 10, Jeff Hardy. Much like his time in WWE, Jeff Hardy just knows how to connect with a crowd. It's why he did become TNA World Champion, and again, much like other times in his career, if he could have just sorted his personal problems out, who the hell knows what would have been. His low point came at Victory Road 2011. If you know, you know, and if you don't know, well, Google is your friend. You'll find it quite shocking, and I think all that matters now is that Jeff Hardy is in a better place. Number 9, Tessa Blanchard. Another controversial performer. In terms of wrestling, Tessa Blanchard was smashing out the park on such a high level that everybody in Impact Wrestling went, well, I think we're going to have to make her the world champion because she's really, really good. The problems did taint this win and ultimately meant she did leave the promotion, but in terms of what this meant and the shockwaves it sent around the wrestling world, you have to give it up for Tessa Blanchard and the company itself. I do worry that it was shrouded in such issues we may never see this again, but that would be wrong. Somebody else should take the risk. Number 8, Jeff Jarrett. Jeff Jarrett had far too much control over his world title reigns. It did mean that he won the belt too much, and really at the end of the day, you'll just start spinning around in circles trying to figure out whether it was actually good or whether it was actually bad. With that said though, go and watch some of the performances when it did click and try and argue with what he achieved. Not only were fans desperate to see him lose, not only were fans desperate to see him get his ass kicked, but when it did happen, it felt like a momentous occasion. He also never really had a bad match and saw the sense to remove himself from the main event scene as soon as Kurt Angle arrived. Also, let's be honest, if it wasn't for JEFFJAARETTZPQ9, maybe TNA wouldn't have lasted as long as it did. Number 7, Samoa Joe. TNA should have built their entire company around Samoa Joe. I'm going to be saying that in reference to a few people in the top 10, but it's true. Samoa Joe is consistently excellent. Like most good guys, the money was in the chase, but when he did finally dethrone Kurt Angle in 2008, not only did it pop the biggest buy rate that TNA ever did, but it actually felt like they were having a fight. So it blurred the lines between sports, entertainment, and MMA, and again, ever since then, what has Samoa Joe done that is bad? Exactly. Number 6, Bobby Roode. Another case of the title making the man making the title. Bobby Roode would hold on to that championship for 256 days, which, yes, is the longest in history. The real joy of all of it is that Bobby Roode embraced this role and made everyone go, wait, why didn't we do this sooner? It makes all the sense in the world. Being able to walk around as the champion, I suppose, was the missing piece of the puzzle, and it's why he eventually got picked up by WWE. Now, they have no clue what to do with him, but I can't help that. I quit the writing team in 2007. Number 5, Austin Aries. Yet another controversial figure. Austin Aries' last reign was terrible, but his first reign was pretty damn good. Because Aries was the first guy to choose option C, which was the stipulation that if you were the X Division champion, you could put it all on the line to have a shot at the World Championship, which he did, and damn it, he pulled it off. It meant you had this great story right away, and the fact that he pulled it off, oodalali. Once more, it's something that TNA should have embraced more of, but they didn't. Number 4, Lashley. It is so important that people go back in time and watch Lashley's run in TNA. It was during all of this where he finally found himself as a performer, as a character, and it baffles the mind that nobody has played some of this to Vince McMahon and gone, just do that. He's awesome. And while I get that he is protected in WWE, you could do so much more with him as a persona, and again, it's all out there, it just so happened to go down in total non-stop action. Number 3, AJ Styles. AJ Styles should be number 1 on this list. He personified everything about TNA, and if it wasn't for him, I totally believe that the company would have died. Unfortunately, I think the company knew this and also assumed that he would never leave, so he was never properly given his due, and every time he became the world champion, we never doubled down on it. It's why he did leave the company in 2014, because if you can believe it, they lowballed him on cash. So yeah, every time he was the world champion, a few days later, or that's how it felt anyway, he wasn't anymore. And it's another Samoa Joe situation. You should have taken Samoa Joe, and you should have taken AJ Styles, and they should have been TNA Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock. And they kind of were, but not properly. Number 2, Sting. A man whose aura never dies, given that he recently debuted for AEW at the age of 61 and still felt like a badass, Sting was TNA's franchise player. He always felt right with the World Championship. When people built them, they came out the other side far bigger than they were before, and if TNA was ever in a bind, they turned to Sting, and he was just so flipping consistent. And some argued that he was paid way too much, but I disagree with that entirely. Once again, I think if Sting never decides to go to TNA, well, we ain't talking about them in the present sense in 2020. Number 1, Kurt Angle. I mean, who else? Shocking the wrestling world like crazy. When he did leave WWE and go straight to TNA, it actually felt like at this moment that truly they could be a major competitor or a major player in the market. It didn't really go that way, but Kurt Angle did his flipping best. He did, however, increase audiences, sell more pay-per-view buys, and had great matches with everyone. Like, that's just Kurt Angle summed up. Doesn't matter if he was in WWE, TNA, New Japan, In My House, he could have a good match with a broom. Also, the fact that his first run in TNA was longer than his first run in WWE, well, that just makes your mind melt. How did he achieve so much in what feels like so little time? Number 1. And there you go, we're all said and done. If you want to argue it, you can do it in the comments below. Then make sure you like the video, share the video, and subscribe. Head over to whatculture.com, read yourself some articles, follow What Culture on Twitter, What Culture WWE, and watch more videos here on What Culture Wrestling. My name is Simon from What Culture. Thank you for joining me as always. I'll see you on the next one.